welcome to another episode of a podcast about names and other stuff. Hopefully you listened to the previous episode, and so now you have met my friend Alissa. Well, I guess maybe not met her in the traditional sense. You may not have seen her face to face. You might not physically have met Alissa, but having heard about her names, having heard about who she is, you know, being Big Alissa and not Old Alissa, if you will, you now have some idea about my friend. And hopefully, as you heard her story, you heard us talking about her names and a little bit about her, and even some of my names even too, hopefully you're seeing bits of yourself in her. I know I did when I was talking with her. And today's episode, this new episode we have here is, again, we're sitting there and we're talking more. And I will tell you that my friend Alissa, she goes places I didn't expect. I learned things about her I did not imagine. Things that make her a fuller, more complete human being, for sure. But also that have helped me to be more kind and considerate and conscientious even of people who I disagree with. She's really helped me to be a better human and to treat others as human beings better. So I hope you enjoy this episode. I acknowledge that sometimes we get a little bit out there in left field and ramble some, but my hope is that as you sit in and just listen to our conversation as two friends, as we talk about Alissa, as we talk about her names, as we talk about who she is and who she strives to be, I hope that it helps you to see human beings as they are. Beautiful. Okay, well, so again, I haven't recorded it yet, but I'll have an intro of some sort that does something. And this is part two. We have talked about all three of your names. Alyssa, Claire, Keller.
Yep.
Right? And I remember it's Claire without an I.
Uh-huh.
And
yes, that's
Alyssa
me.
without a Y.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then we talked about Susie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. We talked about single. Actually, they go a little bit, darker too. We talked about being from somebody from Hoptown, as it were, as a title. Your official title is executive director. And then we were talking between takes here about stuff. And I have a quote here. This one is coming from Gabor Mate. I hope I'm pronouncing their name right. It says, "Trauma is not what happens to us, but what we hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness."
Ooh.
And so,
That's a lot to unpack.
in light of some of what you were sharing with me before, of essentially about what it feels like carrying your name of daughter of, what was your mom's name again?
Christy.
Okay, so the daughter of Christy. And I'm not saying that to say that your entire life is nothing but trauma. Christy, if you're listening, your daughter did not say to be your daughter was nothing but trauma. But you were describing, as we all have, stories of being a kid and those things that stick in you when you have like moments where you feel like, man, my mom or dad are doing this thing, and that is not at all how I wish they had said something. Or I'm so glad they didn't tell me if we were eating my grandpa's turkeys, because I wouldn't have looked at it like
Right.
These are the sort of things that we were talking about, right? And so what does it mean to be daughter or granddaughter or sister? Like, you've mentioned these people,
Right.
but you've not talked much about you to them so much as them.
Yes. So you were talking about husband. I feel like I'm not a good daughter a lot. But and I don't think I'm not as good of a sister as my brother is a brother. I'll say that. But being a daughter, I think it carried more responsibility, like looking back. And I think a lot of the things that we were talking about come from like a sense of protection, really protecting my little soul and my little body in ways that then maybe like embedded these like limitations that I didn't know I had. Like, my mom always says that when I was, well, there's a lot about this. She said I didn't crawl.
Okay.
But for a minute, because I didn't want to do, I just wanted to walk, and that I didn't want to be like on the floor and like hurting my knees. Then when I was a kid, I was always told to stop. Like if I was running, don't run. And I think it's because I would fall. I guess I'm very clumsy. I could walk apparently, but not run. And I would cry. I was very sensitive, very, very sensitive. And so I was still like, don't run. And so then like, okay, don't run. I can't run. I've always said like, if I'm running, someone else better run too, because like I'm only going to be I don't even know that I would run if I was chased. I would just be like, whatever, catch me.
This is the end.
Yeah, very resigned to like, well, this is how I go.
Mom said don't run.
Yeah, mom told me not. Mama said no running. And like I didn't learn how to ride a bike. I used to get made fun of all the time because I didn't know how to ride a bike, and I finally was like, I know how. I just don't wanna do it. So I finally like learned kind of how to ride a bike when I was like 12 or something. And my brother rode a bike all the time. But I was like, I had a bike with training wheels. I wanted to learn how to ride a bike. I wanted to learn how. And I was told that you just had to learn. Like, you just had to do it and that you risked falling, you know? And so it was like, well, we'll put you at the top of a hill and either you ride or you fall.
You ride or you die.
Yeah, ride or die, literally. And I was, in my, like, looking back in my little brain, like, that was literally, like.
That was the dichotomy that they said, or you fall, but you heard, or I die?
Well, or like it was going to hurt.
Yeah.
And I did not want to hurt, apparently. It was very precious. And so, like, I didn't want to do that. And there wasn't, like, another option. And they would also tell me stories. Like, there's a story about my dad when he was a kid and riding a bike and how he fell on a hill and it, like, scraped his whole face off or something terrible. And so, like, those would be the stories that, you know, like, oh, well, you get to the top of a hill and you either ride or you fall. When I was 8, I fell, and it's like, oh my gosh, okay, well, I don't want that to happen, so no riding.
I'll walk.
Guess. Yeah, the walking seems like my jam, you know. So I don't want to say it like limited me, but I was definitely not. I mean, some of this was just by sheer nature. I was not the one doing anything athletic. I took dance, which dance is very athletic in some ways, but like I was not playing. I never played a sport, never. Yeah. But I didn't do anything like that, and it was like you don't run, you know. Almost like I don't want to say that I was taught to be prissy, which would be something very people who know me now would be like, what? But yeah, it was definitely a. These are things you do not do, Alissa. You do not do these, Alissa. Or those were things Alissa didn't do. Susie didn't get an option at that point. But Alissa was encouraged to like play outside and swim and you know do like other outdoorsy things, but anything that might involve me getting hurt.
Wow.
And so maybe like looking at it, it's like a protection. And I mentioned this, and I don't think my mom would ever listen to this, but I will even tell her if my mama was here. Mama is definitely one of her names, but pessimist is as well. So like if I could get hurt, I was going to get hurt.
Yeah,
it seemed like so. And maybe she didn't feel like that when I was little, but I think that it happened enough that. I mean, I say it happened enough.
It might have only been once, but to her it was
like,
enough.
Well, and
yeah,
I mean for me though, like. A skinned knee was like tragic to me. You know, like I did not want to be. Yeah. I didn't want to be in pain. I mean, I still don't. But like, if those are my options, like you could try really hard, but it's gonna hurt. Nope, pass. Like.
And so as we were talking about, like that's so not me, and mostly my kids too. Like the pain thing doesn't turn them off, but like I like tattoos. I mean, the pain doesn't bother me. Like. For me, it's another form. It's another language to interpret essentially pain.
Yeah, that is a good point.
Not in a sick way where I'm like, please punch me, but more in a way of okay, it exists. Why does it exist? Is it serving its purpose? Then I'll listen to it, and it won't stop me. Well,
and I feel like in some ways, I think I have a high tolerance for some kinds of pains. Like, sometimes I'll have like a terrible headache, and it's like, have you taken anything? I'm like, no, it's fine, you know, and just keep on doing whatever I'm doing. So, but there was, I don't know, there was some kind of like disconnect there that like this is gonna hurt. And I find tattoos fascinating. Pain is part of my issue with tattoos, but my bigger is commitment. So
those are two very important parts of tattoos.
Yeah,
you have to be committed to it and endure the pain.
Yeah. So if the pain was not too much, I feel like I would get a tattoo and then be like, okay, well now I want something else because like this is not anyway.
Well, yeah, then you get another one.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I think either I'd be like, why did I ever do this, or I'd be like all in. So,
yes. Yeah.
Which is kind of how I am. I'm kind of like I said, I'm on or I'm off. Like that's sometimes even like being balanced is terrifying to me. I was like, that doesn't sound fun at all, you know, but anyway.
I would say that you could almost describe that as, if you want to give it a name, you could say that you're committed.
Oh, maybe
Not
Emma?
not in the sense for, the hospital we have down the street from here.
Well, or that.
Not that kind of committed, but in the sense that you, like you said, on or off, or this is what I'm going to do or I'm not going to do.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah. Sometimes. Yes.
Sometimes
Yes.
you're occasionally committed.
I'm occasionally committed.
Okay.
I was talking to someone recently, and they were like, my mom tells me this all the time. Like, you just need to say no to things. And I'm like, you're right. Not going to do that, but okay.
Well, okay, so then here's a title that I
Okay.
used to carry, and
Yeah.
I now say that I'm in remission.
Okay.
But hearing you describe your work-life balance
Mm-hmm.
when we were in between recording sessions here, would you say that you carry the title of workaholic?
Ooh.
Again, I used to carry it. I definitely did. I don't anymore. I'm in recovery. I'm still in remission.
I think it depends on how we look at it. I think I'm a thinkaholic. If
Okay.
that's I've never
Thinkaholic.
I've never used that term before. I love like the theoretical space and to think. I like to like call myself the idea factory sometimes. It's like I can just come up with ideas, and frankly, a lot of times I don't care if they happen. Like that's not
Yeah.
the fun part. The implementation is the hard part to me. The ideas, that's where the beauty is, So I think like my brain is always working, but when I think of a workaholic, it's someone who like I guess I can't let go of a lot of things. Like
I mean, because you mentioned how, well, I'll be up till midnight
Yeah,
working on this again.
yeah,
and the board tells me I don't have to do these things, but I'm going to do these things.
Well,
and I don't have to be. If I'm not there, they won't notice. They won't care.
right.
But now the COVID's over, I'm kind of going to be there.
Right, I'd have to be there. Well, and I just went to Washington D.C. a week or so ago, and like went to museums and did that kind of stuff, and like I'm almost like blinded by work because I mean I want to go to museums because I've always wanted to go to museums. It's like that's part of who I am. Like I love those stories and like developing those stories. But now when I go to a museum, I'm like, wait a minute. What did they call a graveyard? A site of memory? That's fascinating. We can use that. Or like, I've never would have thought of put lighting that way. So like even it's almost like like things that I used to just be able to enjoy like as they were. I'm like starting to dissect them and thinking about how that I can take pieces I learned to implement so that we can make something bigger or better or improved on or whatever it may be. So maybe I am a workaholic. Like I said though, I really am good at laying very still. And if you like walked in my house, you would say I'm not a cleanaholic for sure. Like my house is definitely like the sanctuary where I don't want to do anything.
Okay.
Literally. Much to some people in my life, to their chagrin, like.
But they don't live with you, so whatever.
I know. That's what I say. I'm like, it's my house.
As you said before, the joys of being single.
The joys. You know what? I have 2 cats, and they are fine with it.
Yeah.
They love it.
They can find their stuff.
If there's a piece of paper on the floor, they're like, place for me to sit. It's fantastic. So, I don't know. I do think that it's hard to turn off that work and that and I think part of that comes from being passionate about what I do. Yeah. And if I can even be so like boastful saying being good at it, like that's part of being good at it is that everywhere I go, everywhere I look, I'm like looking at either opportunities or stories or an angle. I hadn't thought about doing this or I don't know. Yeah. And I guess I don't do it all the time, but it's it's definitely a part of my thought process at names. Yeah. My Instagram name is Museum Lady, and I did not make it. A friend of mine made it for me. It was really funny. It was I didn't have an Instagram account. This was years ago, but I was already working here, and she and I were doing something. She was like, "You need an Instagram account. Give me your phone." And she started doing it, and she was like, "Do do 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 do," and then she giggled, and I was like, "What?" And then she was like, Museum Lady, and so that's who I am. Yeah. And I think I've been called that in other places in town too.
What is that? Is that an insult?
No.
Okay. I'm just trying to think like, hey there, Museum Lady, get off my yard or something like that. Like,
I feel like it deserves a cape, actually, like a superhero. I'm just kidding. But yeah, so like that's one. I feel like that I don't take Museum Lady off very often. Yeah. And like. As a kid, I don't know that I would have thought about it. I think you think of librarians more, but like if I'd close my eyes and think about like what somebody who runs a museum looks like and what they do, I don't want to be that though. I want to like
Really?
throw the like shake it up a little bit. Oh,
So-
I blew
so-
your mind there.
Well, yeah, because I'm like, okay, so you're like, you own this. Like, I am museum lady. But when I
Yes.
close my eyes, I don't want to look like her.
Well, and it's kind of like, this I bought from somewhere else. If it's from I think it's a publication, The Bitter Southerner. It's like being Southern. Like Southern would be a name I carry for sure. And I feel that I want to own the heck out of that because I am Southern. Everything about me is Southern. And I feel like there are some expectations of what that means that are not me.
Like what?
I talk about the history all the time, but this like hearkening to the past and to the good old days. Yeah, no, who are they good for? Not everybody.
They weren't good for my people.
They were not good for your
but
people.
some people, it was good for some people.
It was good for some people. I
Just
would
not
say,
mine.
like right now, maybe not good for everyone. No, definitely not good for everyone right now, even. But that idea of like what is Southern, I think it has to. I don't want to discount other regions. Don't get me wrong, but like
Yeah, well, let's make it very, very specific then, so you can just be free. What does it mean to be Southern
To
as
me?
Alissa / Susie / all the other names we've said so far from Hoptown?
Well, I also think it's funny when people think that we're not Southern because we're from Kentucky, and I'm like, well, you clearly have never been to a dinner or to a supper at my house.
You've just never been to Kentucky, period.
Yeah. But to me, being Southern, it is celebrating that individuality and celebrating, but our connection to each other and our reliance on each other to get through things. Whether it's borrowing. Not that I would ever do this, but like borrowing a cup of sugar from somebody.
Not that I would as a Southerner.
Well, no, hold
but-
on. I say that. I say I would not go next door. I mean, I could go next door. All of my neighbors would give me sugar, but I can't. Every time I walk in my mama's house, she's like, "Do you need?" And I can like grocery shop at her house. If I need something from the grocery, she's like, "Well, I have it." I'm like, "Well, if I'm going to go to your house, anyway." So that idea though of like communal.
Mm-hmm.
As someone who loves to live by herself, but still that sense of communion, and especially over food. And I know Southerners are not the only ones who love their food and their food culture, but that idea, that connection to the land, connection to the food, and how that brings you all together around a table, to me feels very Southern. I think the heat feels very Southern.
It's interesting you say that because I wouldn't have said that myself, but yes. I mean, that is part of why my ancestors were here. It was because of the unique heat in the South and the
Yes.
need for workers who won't die in it.
Who won't die in it and who actually already know how to function and how to farm in it.
Yeah.
So we just take advantage of that.
Yeah.
People coming from England didn't necessarily know how to do that.
Yeah.
But I think the heat makes us like, I don't know, there's that idea of being a workaholic. There also has to be like a slower pace. And I think that there's a lot there's a lot to be learned in the piddling. To me,
Should you spell piddlin for my non-Southern listeners?
let
Let me see if I can spell it. Piddlin with a hard apostrophe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So to piddle, is to like waste time. But you're not really, when you're piddling, you're not really wasting time. No time is wasted,
Yeah.
And so if you're piddling, you're just kind of like doing little tasks or running little errands.
Yeah.
You're just piddling.
That's what my kids do when they were told. When mom says, do your chores, my kids
piddling.
piddle.
Yes, I'm a piddler. There you go. That's another a proud one. But I think that maybe comes from some of the heat and some of the humidity and that it's like languid, like you just have to like, ugh. When I lived in Charleston, I mean, you would open the door and like the heat would hit you in the face.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, I don't want to say I love it, but I kind of love it because it does. It makes you uncomfortable in some ways, but I would much rather be hot than cold anytime. But it also like makes you slow down a little bit.
Yeah.
Anytime I go anywhere with anybody else and we're walking, I'm like, you're gonna have to slow down. I cannot do this. And part of that's just because I'm like old and tired and out of shape and lazy.
Because if you walk too fast, it turns into running.
And I can't run.
And
We
can't
know
run.
this. Not a runner. That's not one of the things that I am. But I don't know. To me, being Southern is also being open-minded and recognizing the diversity and the beauty of that around you, and maybe even celebrating the beauty of what is around you.
That's partly why it is that I wanted you to define Southern for you, because I will say that most people I've interacted with who aren't familiar with or from the South, especially back out West, would never associate being a Southerner with being open-minded and embracing diversity.
Which is why, as someone who thinks of herself as very Southern, I want to like carry that banner, you know, that, I mean, I like not all the language, but like there's so many like little phrases. I just saw one on something just today, the hug more necks. I mean, like not everybody says like, I just want to hug your neck. And I mean, it just means something so different. Or I want to wring your neck too. Yes. Oh, I got told that a lot. Probably more than hugging it. I don't know. Just there's a beauty of language. There's a beauty of that diversity is not necessarily something that I think from the outside Southerners are seen to celebrate. And I can see, I get that. Yeah. I get that. But there's also an intimacy within that we get for living so close to one another for so long that is, for lack of a better way, that's complicated.
Yeah.
And there's humanity on all sides of that. There's ugly on so many sides of that, but then there's beauty to it too. And so like, how can we reconcile that today? And not that I'm going to be like, you know, changing the world or anything, but to me, that's part of being Southern is how we get over that and move past it. Or move through it, maybe not move past it, move through it, and you know, carry it with us.
Yeah.
But in a loving and accepting way. And to me, Southerners are big and they're loving and they're caring and they say things they shouldn't, and they say things in ways that are creative and thoughtful and nuanced, and I'm fascinated, and they make the best food, obviously.
That's your opinion. I'll allow you that opinion. I'm not.
I'm just kidding.
I'll allow you that opinion. I think it depends on what you're eating. I mean, in my time going around, I think everybody has their food they offer, and it's what you're cooking depends on who makes the best XYZ thing.
Right. I mean, there's certain things that like even like I have gotten to the point I won't even order green beans in a restaurant because like they're not going to make them as good as my grandmother, my mama, or my brother, you know, because they're just not. Because green beans should taste like meat, and that's all there is to it. They shouldn't be green anymore.
I will allow you space for that. That your vegetables should taste like meat. Okay, if you say so. Again, I'm from California.
Oh yeah, they should not be green anymore. They should be brown to even darker, and they should taste like meat.
Okay.
My older brother, he is a great cook, and he'll even make like little menus, and that he loves that I say that. So he will put on the menu green beans that taste like meat.
Okay, that's at least he's honest.
Yeah, and they're delicious. Anyway.
I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. Anyway, so
I'll take your word for it.
I don't know. Yeah. I embrace the idea of being Southern because I think if you run away from it, at least we grew out of the dirt down here. Like there's only
you have no hope of being anything other than Southern.
I can't.
You can't not be Southern.
No, I can't tuck my hot town in. Like I mean, it's written all over my face for better or for worse, and yeah. And that goes back to the humanity of it all. Like, and are there awful things that are connected with it? Sure. Are there beautiful things? Absolutely. And I feel like a lot of times in what I do, I'm pushing that pretty story, you know, and pushing the good side because that's what people want. That kind of like the imposter deal. Like they want the shiny. I do too. I want things that are shiny and dance and sing and have jazz hands and sparkle, but that there's something behind it always, and there's some driving force behind things, and sometimes it's not as pretty and shiny, and so like where does all that come from? I don't know. Those kind of things fascinate me. Food does too, and I'm not to downplay. I should back up. I grew up where like it's so much how much like food culture around here has expanded is so amazing. I mean, I was in my 20s before I thought I even knew what an avocado was. And I was like...
Meanwhile, our oldest son, that was his first... Actually, all of our kids, that's their first food.
I'm not going to say that they weren't here, but I don't know. Like, it's not something that we ever would have had. And then I had this roommate when I lived in Charleston, and she was like, you never had an avocado? You'll like it. And she just would like feed me things. And I was like, it's fantastic. Anyway, but now like I very much, Southern food is not the only good food.
Yes.
I understand that.
You're like, now I like avocados too.
I do like avocados. And, but like when we get together as a family, what do we eat? I mean, every time we do this, I'm always like, they're like, Lisa, do you want anything special? I'm like, we're gonna
have the same thing every time.
Or the following, 6 items on the menu. They're like, well, of course. I'm like, well, then
what else is there?
Then we're good, right? So if corn and green beans are there, then I'm set.
Your song from the Carolina Chocolate Drops.
Oh, I love them.
Oh, yeah. Cornbread and butter beans.
Yeah.
Yeah. You just made me think of that song just now.
Well,
if you are listening and you don't know them, you should listen to that song. It's a very interesting song about eating beans and then going to bed with the person you love.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting combination when you actually follow that through. Logically, you realize that's a smelly situation that you might not want to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. I know the song very well. Oh, I've seen them in concert a couple of times years ago. And fantastic. Oh, loved it.
Yeah. All right. So, Southerner. Hoptown. We got into a little bit, but I want to really just have you push and hopefully not risk your job. But what are some of the names that you know, and not say that you carry yourself, but names that you know are associated with our community here that you are ashamed of?
Ooh. Before we do that, can I tell one more
go
about
ahead.
my job that was something that happened here a number of years ago that needed to happen. It was, but was viewed not necessarily in as positive of a light. It wasn't said directly to me. It was on some, social media post, but that they needed to run my liberal butt out of town, right? And so liberal, I think, is another name that gets put on me. And I think those who put it on me, it's considered an insult, and I don't take it as that at all. So I was like, well, I don't really want to be run out of town, but...
Well, what does liberal mean to you?
Probably all the things. It's going to sound terrible what I say, because it's only pretty words. Open-minded, I think is what it means. Open and accepting, I think is how I would look at it. Liberal, and thinking about things I don't know, I don't want to say from a bigger context. For me, that's what it is. Like, in some ways, like, I don't matter. Like, I mean, that sounds so negative. I don't mean it that way, but I don't matter. Like, there's a huge community in this town, in this world, whatever. And like, I can do things to help with that, but like everything that happens does not directly affect me. Mm-hmm. And that is okay. And I can support things that help other people, even if it doesn't, so I feel like that, to me, that's what it means. And for some reason, I feel like it means like new. And I don't know what that means. To me, the word conservative sounds old. Yeah. And I don't mean in age, but like
just
stuck in a
old
way.
ideas.
Yeah. And, yeah.
So what do you think people mean when they label you liberal? What do you think they're meaning to say? Like if they were willing to be honest and not use nice words, but use not so nice words that maybe a third grader would use.
Ooh.
So not quite where we need to use my censor button.
No.
but still, like if they were honest and more transparent about what they mean to call you when they call you liberal, what would they be actually trying to call you? This
may not be exactly. I feel like that sometimes it can be viewed as like. Oh, she really doesn't understand what's going on. Like, I don't want to say, I don't want to say ignorant. I don't mean it that way, because I don't think I don't think that's the right word. But that, well, you don't understand how things really work, and it's like
confused and
like
lost,
like rose-colored glasses. Okay. Like, well, that's not how people really are. And it's like, well, yeah, if that's how you treat people, that's not how they're going to be. So, like, what we can be better. One of the things gets on my nerves more than anything is when someone says, well, that's just how I am, so get used to it. Well, you can always be better.
Yeah.
And I don't care who you are. And I mean, I'm not trying to say that everyone should always, embrace your individuality. Absolutely. But if what you're doing is hurting someone else in whatever capacity, and they're brave enough to mention it, then it's not just who you are. Like, you're making a decision to be that way. So, like, maybe don't. Like,
Maybe choose not to.
Maybe just don't be that way. So I don't know. I think that it maybe comes across as like this whole idea of like being a snowflake, and it's like, I think snowflakes are beautiful. I don't know why that's
I've heard people use that in derogatory manner, and I get what they're trying to say. And it's like, so you're saying that there's something wrong with me because I'm a unique individual that's quite interesting the longer you look at me, with so many layers and complexities, but I'm also made up of simple parts like everyone else? You're right. That's bad.
I don't understand. And like snowflakes, they all end up sticking together and they make a bigger impact. Like, I don't know why this is bad. So
is it because I'll melt if you get too hot? Because, I mean, I guess I will cry.
Yeah. Okay. But I'm adaptable. Hey, I don't know. So I like that idea that snowflake, like, oh, so sensitive, gets your feelings hurt. Everything has to be, gets offended about stuff. And it's like, well, or don't be okay, but maybe there's sometimes when we should be offended. Like, it's okay. Like and because someone does something that's offensive doesn't necessarily make them a bad person. I think that there's like this dichotomy that it's either like, you're good or you're bad. Well, no one is either of those things. So, or like holy. So like, oh, well, if you're offended by what I said, then you must think I'm a bad person. No, I just don't agree with you on this point. I have such a good friend that, I don't know that we agree on anything.
Yeah.
And there's some things that we decide not to discuss because, and we can usually sense it and we'll drop it because we are so far apart on certain things. But sometimes though, it's back to that idea of humanity. Like, it brings us to a point where it's like, I can't tell how many times I'm like, I abhor what you're saying. I do not agree with a word you're saying, but at least I understand why you're saying it now.
Yeah.
Like why you feel that way. And I think like I think that there's this sense that this is what I think, and now I need to convince you. I don't believe in that. Like, back to that independence idea.
Yeah.
Like, no, like I can't. Anyway,
you're an independent liberal Southerner.
I am. Are all those things allowed to be in one place?
I mean, there's a political party that was associated with that from the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Democrats.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true. Well, and then civil rights happened and changed what people thought of Democrats and Republicans. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. So then you have like an independent Southerner. It's like, but that could also be like, I'm gonna fly my rebel flag. Like, like it could
which is still independent Southern
exactly.
individual.
I know.
Yeah, that's true.
So.
See, you're look at you, executive directoring.
I'm a conundrum.
You're humanizing, Confederate sympathizers.
I mean, as someone who grew up with that kind of stuff, looking back, we've talked about this already, kind of, this like, well, how would I have done it? And there's some of these things that I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. Or I used to go, I'm going to admit this. When I was in college, I would go to a bar. That's not the part I'm meeting.
I was going to say, wow, she went to a bar.
Woo! I go to a bar, and I went every week on Thursday nights, and I loved it. And they played old country music there. This guy set up on stage, and he sang old country music. And when I say this, needless to say, the demographic of the room was pretty monotone, or monochrome, I guess. And he always ended the night. He played the song Dixie. Then he played Sweet Home Alabama. He played the guitar with a beer bottle. It was fantastic. And a huge Confederate flag would fall down behind him. And I mean, whoa, I was in.
Yeah.
And I'd be lying if I didn't say that I don't still enjoy the music, right?
Yeah.
But what I hope in my soul is I know I wasn't doing it out of hatred. I know I wasn't. I don't know what I was doing it out of. Oblivious, maybe? Not thinking about it in any kind of deeper way?
I mean, you were doing it as a proud Southerner who didn't see it as being anything more than being a proud Southerner.
And just not even being a proud Southerner, just enjoying the music. There's a lot of growing up in Hometown, you got to learn a lot of different music, but I grew up listening to that music. They had a good deal on bourbon on those nights. Like there were things about it that were, it was fun. And so in college, I even wrote a paper about it. It was in my
about going to the bar and cheering at the at the Confederate flag?
100%. That's what the paper was about. So the professor, who oddly was also from Hopkinsville, he was a Hoptown boy too. We were like buddies, and it was his class on the Civil War. He taught U.S. history, and it was his Civil War class, and we had to write a paper. I may not be exactly right on this, but write a paper on a way or ways that the Civil War was still being fought today. And I was like, I got this, right?
Okay.
And I don't remember how I spun it, but I do remember it was due on a Friday, and we would go Thursday nights. And so I told him, I was like, my paper's going to be late because I got to do some research tonight. And I did. But he told me years later, since this was in like the early 2000s, that so the format is a little different. He says the only paper he ever got that had a soundtrack, and I didn't even remember doing it. I burned him a CD so he would have the songs.
That's the thing kids these days know nothing about.
I know, but see, one of my other names, overachiever. Well, or like smoke and mirrors, maybe. But just that idea that that sense, that kind of like undercurrent was always there. Again, I don't know what I wrote about at this point. Hopefully it was a little more intellectual. But I wasn't going for that. I know I wasn't.
You were going for, I want this essay to make you feel like you were standing in the bar with me when
I always wanted to feel like that.
When he's hitting the note and the flag drops and we're all cheering. If you don't feel like that when you're done reading this, I failed.
Yes. But what I hope in my soul is that, like, if someone had sat me down and explained it to me, like, Alissa, this is this carries more meaning than what you are recognizing in your privileged little not having to recognize anything else brain. And I mean, like, I wasn't that young, but I was 22, you know, that I would have said, okay, I see that. I appreciate you pointing it out. I hope I wouldn't have been like, I probably would have carried some guilt with it. Like, oh no, I'm a bad person. But I hope I wouldn't have been like, well, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm going to do. And I don't want to downplay. I mean, we had a lot of fun there. And it was, anyway.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is definitely something.
Well, and actually that brings us then back around to
yeah. I'm glad you could connect.
The less fun question I was asking before, because what are some things like that here at Hoptown? Because I know that you know about them more than I do, because you are the executive director of the Museums of Hopkinsville / unofficial historian, because you're not was it Will Turner?
William Turner, yes. He is
you're not William Turner.
I
so you're
not.
But I'd say unofficial, because I mean everybody says, oh, you got to meet William Turner, this and that's, like, and I know I need to meet him eventually, but in a way I almost feel like I don't need to, because I know you.
Oh no, you need to meet William.
No,
William is
you educate me so much, and so it's like, I mean, I'm sure it's gonna be great, but at the same time it's like, you guys don't know her, though. So if you knew her, you'd realize you don't necessarily need to know him, because I get them, and it's really fun and energetic and always interesting and entertaining. And she tells me stories like Confederate flags dropping out of bars. I don't think William might have that story. I don't know.
He probably does not have that story.
But so in that vein,
he does have some really funny. Anyway,
I want those. What do you have like that? That's a name for Hoptown. I mean, because I can think of, like, I know we have like the Tobacco Wars and the Night Riders.
Yeah.
And, I mean,
the Night Rider, oh Lord have mercy. This was only a couple of years ago. I mean, I grew up knowing vaguely what the Night Riders were here, but I was at a conference, like, after I started working here, and after I'd been to I did a whole, like, workshop. It was a whole week long on interpreting African American history, years ago now, like 2018. And we did a session at a conference after that, and we were talking about Night Riders. That was one of our stories here. And I took with me as an object to show, it wasn't our real, authentic Night Rider mask, but we have some in a costume collection. That's another story altogether. But took one of those, which felt real weird flying with that. But anyway,
wonder what TSA thought.
Yeah, but
for those of you listening who don't know Night Rider hoods, how would you describe them?
They were lots of different things, but the way they're most commonly depicted, they were black fabric that was either sewn into a hood with eye holes and, mouth or nose holes cut in. Sometimes Night Riders they were just disguising their identity. Yeah. So what we typically show are the idea of a hood, like something that goes over your whole face. If I do talk to kids about this, it's like, why would you cover your face? just in general, like on Halloween you wear a mask. Like why would you? And it's to hide who you are.
Yeah.
Why do you hide who you are? Because you're doing something you shouldn't be doing. Like anyway, so the whole point of that though, so I held up this mask 100% thinking that it would shock people, and that people might connect it to some other racist organizations.
Because for those of you guys who aren't familiar with them, it is similar to a Klansman hood. It's not the same.
No, it's not
the way the eyes and the mouth are, and the color scheme is entirely different.
Well,
but it is the silhouette in the dark. I can see people who look like me seeing that silhouette in the dark and like, oh, is it the Klan?
Right. Well, and I would say I'm probably speaking out of turn. I don't know as much about the Klan, but like they had a uniform where Night Riders were more so just trying to hide their faces. So some of them would like wrap a bandana around. It wasn't like there wasn't like a hood factory or whatever, or like some seamstress that was making them all. But when I held it up, a young man who works in museum field, who I had never seen before, was an African American man who I think was from Alabama or Mississippi. He was not from here, is my point. I held this up, never thinking someone would say the words Night Rider, because I thought Night Rider was our term. And I held it up and he was like, that reminds me of the Night Riders. And I was like, how does he know that story? And then like through the conversation and my brain working, I was like, he doesn't know our story. Night Rider's a bigger term than what we're used to.
Yeah.
And so, which helped me understand how our use of it and how the imagery of it, while we at the museum for a long time, and I'm thinking in a general approach to local history, saw it as this singular, I don't want to say one-off, but like one-off event, or not like event being a big word. I mean, it was like years long that this struggle, this one-off struggle that happened in this region, and that someone called like that term Night Rider means a lot more.
Yeah.
And we like for things to be ours, So like the thought that we didn't, I don't want to say own it, but we didn't own the term blew my mind, and then made me say, okay. So that way, when we say Night Rider, people here who grew up hearing the story and knowing the story, like they think about it the way I think about it, or thought about it. Other people, especially people of African American heritage, may not know this story at all, but they know that term and they know what that term means. So we, from a local history perspective, we were missing that. We were missing that connection that was being made. Like we didn't even realize it. Kind of like I didn't realize how awful this Confederate flag falling, like I didn't, but it was a great story. It still is a fantastic and kind of a grotesque way, but I mean, it's still like a very important story of our community's history.
Yeah.
It's just more, I think, a little more complicated than, not a little, it's a lot more complicated than we had been putting it. So this is not a name that I would put on here, but it's a kind of a phrase that, oh, well, it wasn't bad here. That's what I feel like I hear a whole lot. Kind of like that good old days. Like, to who? Like, who was it not bad for?
Yeah.
And I've always, from when I was a little kid, I was fascinated with this whole idea, growing up in the diversity of this community, but then, like, this sense of how can I, as a white woman, a white girl, whatever, grow up in a town, grow up in a place, go to a school and have the exact same experiences as someone who doesn't look like me. They're the exact same experiences, and they're completely different at the same time. And that has always like fascinated me. Like, how do we bring that together and reconcile that, and then be open enough to each other to listen to that and to not say, well, that's not how I remember it, so you must be wrong. No.
And I will put in there too, because it's something, another one of those things that a lot of people don't realize, even here within Kentucky, about that when you keep saying diversity, and some people might say, how diverse is Hopkinsville? Demographically, Hopkinsville is the most diverse city in the state, as far as percentage-wise. Now, numbers-wise is different, but when you look at the percentage breakdown of what percentage is actually considered white here in Hopkinsville, and then especially if you just look at just black population alone, but you have Hispanics, we have Japanese people living here. Like,
we do.
But you look percentage-wise, population makeup, we have the largest percentage of minority population for any city in the state of Kentucky.
And I don't even know what that is, because I very, very guilty of, and maybe it comes from growing up here and the diversity of this community expanding even more since I've been an adult. But everything was black and white to me, and I've had to like grow in that understanding that diversity means a lot of things. It doesn't just even mean ethnicity. I mean age. Anyway, but I mean we're at least 30 to 33% black in the city.
And that's not even counting what's going on other like and when people hear that, it's like, really? Hopkinsville? It's like, it's a very, which is why some of the other issues that the city faces are so unique, because it's like when you have such a large population of minority individuals, to then see this disparity and this difference within the lifestyles, it's a unique place. It is.
Well, I know you've read the Been Coming Through Some Hard Times by Jack Glazier, which is a tough thing to read, and it's as someone who works at the museum, he doesn't say great things about us, and I'm okay with that. Please tell us what we can do better. How do we do better? We acknowledge that we can do better, right?
Yeah.
But he says this, and actually that professor I had in college that was from here, he made this comment too, that Hopkinsville and Christian County, not just us, but parts of Todd and Trigg, maybe even into Logan and like on into Callaway County. So that's like southern part of, or southwestern part of the state in particular, is more like Alabama, Mississippi than it is like the rest of Kentucky. And that's where this historian side of me comes in. And that goes back to the people who moved here.
Yeah.
After the American Revolution.
It goes all the way back to the antebellum period. It's the slaveocracy, as it were, is what developed the demographics that we still live in today in this same community.
Absolutely. And that whole idea, so the as far as demographics, so the city's about 30% African American, the county's less, about 20%. But if you look at records, there is a map that's 1878, I believe it's called the Beers map, fun name, but anyway, has nothing to do with that. It has some like demographic breakdown on it, and the split was like 55% white, 45% black then. So you have some amount of flight after the Civil War, but it's really in the 20s and on that you see a lot of that movement away, like the second Great Migration, I guess.
Yeah.
And you, so as diverse as we are now, when as someone at the museum, when we're looking back 100 years ago, we were more so.
Yeah.
Like the scales were tipped even more. And like, how did that work?
Yeah.
And I think for so long, and it's not just us, like everybody has done this, and I will stand by that. I don't want to sound like I've done so many things here. For better or for worse, William Turner, as a historian, he has looked into Black history more than I think he may be given credit for. Okay. And the museum, too, had an African-American woman who was on staff for 25 years. I mean, starting in the 80s on through, she got very sick and left. And I think that I never worked with her. But I think she helped build some amount of trust with the Black community and the museum. I have been told that at some point when the museum was being like arranged, there was going to be a Black History exhibit, and where its placement was, she was like, "You're not putting the Black History exhibit in the back of the building. Like, you're going to move it up closer to the front." And I mean, like, that's a kind of that sounds so obvious to us now.
Yeah.
And my guess is when she said that, whoever was designing it wasn't like, "We're going to put this in the back." They didn't even think about it.
No, to them, it was like, "We're going to put it where it belongs."
Or we're just
which is the back.
Or we're gonna just. I think you're even giving people too much credit on that. Like, we're just gonna, it'll fit here, and like, okay, that's in the back. That does seem bad. Okay, let's fix it, So I think, the museum has tried for a long time. Now, I do think that it's all about building that trust, though, with the community. And I think one of the ways we do that, for better or for worse, I think as a culture, a whole culture, we're moving into this place where we don't just want to hear the good stuff. We want to know about what really happened. Like, tell me, though, what really happened in these situations. And so how do we build trust with a group? It's about listening to them. Yeah. And sharing their story. I don't want to say telling their stories. That's one of the things that as a museum, we're not here. As a person, I get real bad about this, actually. I won't tell you. Yeah. But it should be about a dialogue, And so...
That's something I forget which book it was I was reading. They were talking about that of when you're trying to become an ally for a community or advocate on their behalf, the more important thing than being an advocate is creating spaces for them to tell their own stories.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And that's something that oftentimes people are like, well, now that I know about them and their struggle, I want to advocate on their behalf as an ally and speak up for them. And they're just saying, you know what? Better than that, give space for them to tell their own story.
And that's harder.
Yes, it is.
And I don't mean that from that takes more time.
Yeah.
And it takes that relationship building, which is, it was just a lot easier for me to tell a story, you know? But what does that do to make anything better?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe at least the story was told like,
Yeah.
Making that space, I think, is a very important thing and something that we can always improve on, you know? So, I think that is one of the things about being here. I think we get this whole sense that we're a bunch of good old boys. Well, sure.
I mean, do any men work here?
You know, funny thing. We are bringing on a new full-time staff member in June. The way that we have diversified our staff is we've hired a white man.
Which is diversity for you because you've not had men.
I don't think a man has actually been on the payroll since like 1978 or something.
So look at you, diversifying.
I know. And I was like, it's not often that he gets to be the diverse. Anyway, so yes, but I still think that it's not the museum's fault or anybody who worked here. I mean, history was always told from one perspective, and that there was a right to that. You know, like not a right as in like a privilege, but like that there was, as opposed to a wrong. Like there's a right version of history. Like, is there?
Yeah.
I had a very good friend who's incredibly intellectual say something about revisionist history. She was like, well, how do you feel about revisionist? I was like, history's always been revised. It has to do with who's telling the story. Like, if anything, this you don't hear the term quite as much anymore, but this revisionist history is just broadening it and trying to offer more voices. And again, as someone who just wants to know all the things all the time about all the people, like, I want more voices. Bring it on.
I'm fortunate in high school. I did AP US history, and my teacher, Mr. Wilbert, that was his name. And we did Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States of America was our actual textbook in high school. And I now realize as an adult why that was so important in forming my approach to people and stories and history, because I always was just wondering, why is it that I have this different view? And I realized that most people, especially our age, did not get high school history like that.
Oh, yes.
Howard Zinn, I now realize he's one of those people who's like coined as revisionist and liberal and all those other things. It's like, really? I mean, he's a veteran and he fought in World War II, and he was writing as a person who lived some of these things. But he was big on that. Like, the idea was, let's tell the story of the history from the point of view of the person living it.
Right.
Not from the people who were just sitting back writing it, but what does it look like to be a person in this history?
Absolutely. You know, one of my favorite resources to use are old newspapers, because you're like reading about things that happened in real time and the language that they use. Now, I say that, I was working with a local church, actually. They were trying to, it was the Grace Episcopal Church, and they were trying to tease out the story about Reverend A.H. McNeil. We call him Aaron. His name was not Aaron. His name was Alexander. I don't understand. But
I mean, you're called Susie, so.
I mean, if he were still here, we could find out why he has so many names. But Reverend McNeil, and there just was not a lot of mention of him in our local newspapers, and it was like this disappointment. And I'm like, well, that's part of the story, though.
Yeah.
The newspapers give us a firsthand account, but still they're coming from a certain place and from a certain perspective. And if they are covering a diverse range of stories, they're still covering those from a certain perspective. So just don't.
Yeah.
Does that make them a source that we shouldn't use? No, just being aware of that bias. I mean, we all have that implicit bias. Like, we're all going to bring it all the time, but at least recognizing that it exists, I think, is like step one.
Yeah.
And then we can try to move on past, I don't know what we can, I'm going to stop saying moving past, moving through. Cause like we got to.
Once we acknowledge the bias, at least. Well, I got one more quote I want to read.
Okay.
And then so we can finish with one last name. So this quote, actually, I was in the play The Crucible when I was in high school. And this is one of my favorite, actually, I played John Proctor. It's one of my favorite lines that he has towards the end of the play. So this is John Proctor speaking in The Crucible. He says, because it is my name, because I cannot have another in my life, because I lie and sign myself to lies, because I am not worth the dust on the feet of them that hang. How may I live without my name? I have given you my soul, leave me my name. If there's one name that if you were sitting there like John Proctor and you're like, I'm dying for this name, you can take everything else, you can take my soul, you can take everything that is me, but this is my name, leave me my name, what would that name be?
Oh my God, this is hard. I want to have like a really profound answer. And I think I'm not going to have one. I think Alissa. I mean, I really do. I feel like it embodies who I am. It has history. It has meaning. It has love. It has depth. It's unique. It's not a name that you heard all the time. Like when I was a kid. I mean, here and there, for sure. It can be confused with other names. It can be misrepresented in lots of different ways. But it's got it's who I am. It really is. I don't want to end with a story, but I'm going to. And I find out. And,
like, I don't want to do this, but I'm going to do it anyways.
That's also who I am. As much as I feel like that name, I cannot imagine who April Michelle would be. But it wouldn't be me. Alissa is me for sure. But my mom and my grandmother both hated their given names, like their first names. So there's something too that's so beautiful to me about this strange reconciliation around me being gifted with a name that does carry meaning and does carry beauty and does carry some amount of light to it. And that then I have to, without ever really thinking about it, I have to live up to that and have to live up to the fact that I am Alissa and I will always be Alissa, one way or another.
Well, thank you, Alissa, for doing this with me and sharing your name with everyone. Because to me, you are an interesting person.
Thank you.
And I'm like, you know what? I think it'd be really fun to sit and just get to know her better and the names that she carries. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thanks, Kamar.
Yeah, no problem. All right. That's it. I'm going to have some fancy thing that you guys will all be listening to after this. I have no idea what it's going to be, but I promise it'll be beautiful and wonderful and amazing. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in this podcast are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of any institution, organization, or corporation. The material and information presented here is for general information purposes only. All persons who participated did so of their own free will and speak for themselves only, regardless of any personal affiliations they may possess. This podcast has been a production of Salt.Light.Love Ministries. All rights reserved.